I thank the House. Questions without notice. The member for Eden Monaro.
Thank you. My question is to the Minister for Regional Development. An Auditor General's report published yesterday found 55% of the grants earmarked for regional development over a 4-year period were given to major cities. How can the Minister claim the government is delivering for the regions when it is clearly not?
The Deputy Prime Minister has the call.
Well, Mr Speaker, I thank the honourable member for her question, and might I state that in that Auditor General's report, which I've been through, it says quite clearly that they don't stand by the integrity of the data. That is actually stated in it, and it also states that it includes
members on my left.
If you want to hear the answer, member for Grainler. And it also includes such things as a community grant scheme, which does not include regional areas. And of course, you must clearly understand, and I know you do, that includes things such as the
Leader of the Opposition.
Mr Speaker, he's such a comedian. But anyway, and it includes such things as the Royal West Children's Society, which of course is based in Manly, and we're going to say that they aren't deserving of funds. Mr Speaker, it includes such things as Ronald McDonald House, which of course is proximate to where those children have to go for treatment. Are we going to therefore argue against that? I mean, I understand the member for Eden Monaro's question, but overwhelmingly, of course, this does benefit people in regional area. And we have things, Mr Speaker, and I was looking at one such as in the member for Flynn's electorate, where we upgraded the water requirements for the small town of Bigoton. I think it's only about 890 people or something live in Bigoton, very small town for the member for Eden Monaro. And in that town, it was over $5 million was required to upgrade the water system. Now, this is just not possible. It's not possible for a cost like that to be carried by the people of Bigoton unless they get the support of a government who looks to the corners of this nation. A government that looks to the corners of this nation, and that's what such things as a Building Better Regions Fund does. That's what such things as the Building Better Regions Fund does. And because it does that, we have the capacity to help those small towns. We have the capacity to help towns such as in my area of Werris Creek, a railway town, where the same thing, we had to upgrade the dams and the water facilities, which the Building Better Regions Fund and grants such as this do. Now, I acknowledge that the administration of sections of that grant are done in the city, the administration, and that certain grants, such as Ronald McDonald House, are in the cities. But I hope the member for Eden Monaro is not asking for us to remove funding to such things as Ronald McDonald House.
The member for Higgins.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. 70% of Australians aged 16 years and over have met the call to be fully vaccinated against COVID-19. With such a tremendous effort and more milestones to come, will the Prime Minister outline to the House how the Morrison government's national plan for reopening is working by putting restrictions like lockdowns behind us so we can safely live with the virus?
The Prime Minister has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I thank the member for Higgins for her question and her constant advice when it has come to managing the issues of the pandemic, given her great experience, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, it is great news for Australia. 70% of Australians aged over 16 have been fully vaccinated. Our full vaccination rate now, Mr Speaker, is in excess of the United States, and indeed our first dose vaccination rates have not only passed the European Union, countries like Germany and so on, Mr Speaker, and Israel. Within days we will also pass on first dose vaccinations the United Kingdom as well. Mr Speaker, in Victoria in particular, and in Tasmania, they will go through that 70% gate in the next 24 hours, joining New South Wales and the ACT as Australia's vaccination rate surge to what we expect will be, Mr Speaker, one of the highest vaccination rates of anywhere in the world. Now, Mr Speaker, that has been a great effort by Australians, and I thank Australians for keeping their side of the deal of the national plan which said, go out and roll up your sleeve, Mr Speaker, and we will get through this together, Mr Speaker. And that is what Australians have been doing. They have been keeping their side of the deal of the national plan, and that has been enabling them not just to have saved lives, Mr Speaker, saved more than 30,000 lives over the course of this pandemic, not only just to have one of the strongest economic performances throughout the course of the pandemic, but, Mr Speaker, as we now move towards having one of the highest rates of vaccination around the advanced world today. Now, Mr Speaker, that means the Melbourne lockdown will end on Thursday night as a result of the national plan, Mr Speaker. It means that in New South Wales and the ACT, the lockdown has already come to an end, Mr Speaker. It means restaurants and cafes and pubs open, Mr Speaker. It means the barbers, Mr Speaker, and the hairdressers will be able to fix many of the home cuts that have been done during lockdown, Mr Speaker, over the last few months. I know there's plenty of people looking forward to that. Mr Speaker, live theatre is open again in Sydney now. Hamilton is back on the stage, Mr Speaker, and in the middle of November, Harry Potter will return to the stage in November as the national plan takes effect. Kids are back at school. They're going back to school, Mr Speaker, and what's great, kids are getting together again. They're having play dates. They're having sleepovers again, Mr Speaker. That's what the national plan has been designed to deliver. And in Queensland, Mr Speaker, I welcome the fact that they're opening their borders again in December. I welcome the fact that they're introducing home quarantine for people returning to Queensland. But, Mr Speaker, there are 8,000 Queenslanders who need to be able to get home, Mr Speaker, and have access to home quarantine. And I encourage the Queensland Government further down that path, as I also do in South Australia and in Tasmania. Mr Speaker, Australia is opening up because of their great efforts. Thank you, Australia.
The member for Eden-Monaro.
Thank you. And my question is again to the Minister for Regional Development. Can the Minister confirm this government has spent regional funds on the North Sydney pool but rejected a funding application for the Bega War Memorial Pool?
The Deputy Prime Minister. The member for Gellibrand is warned.
Mr Speaker, I find it rather peculiar that the member for Gellibrand has all straight away opened up with a joke about Ronald McDonald, obviously referring to Ronald McDonald House. You must think that is humorous, member for Gellibrand. I'm sure the people watching you think you're a complete lark.
Deputy Prime Minister, I've asked the member for Gellibrand. The member for Gellibrand will not interject again, or he'll be ejected. So to the Deputy Prime Minister, I've already cautioned the member for Gellibrand. Deputy Prime Minister has the call.
Well, thank you very much, Mr Speaker. And it does seem the Building Better Regions Fund, in the last round there was $1.7 billion worth of requests, which shows that this is an incredibly well responded to grant system. And within that system we had over 1,000 applications in the last round. Now, Mr Speaker, there are so many areas in regional Australia, and I acknowledge the member for Eden-Monaro's question, where she talked about a certain grant, which unfortunately, within the envelope that we have, we were unable to help on that issue. But what we can say quite clearly, is that in the last round, in further discussions within the Expenditure Review Committee of the Coalition, we extended a further $100 million. $100 million, a $300 million package, because we look towards those corners of our nation which we can help. And Mr Speaker,
the Deputy Prime Minister will pause. Deputy Prime Minister will pause. Members on my left will cease interjecting. The member for Macquarie is persistently interjecting. I will not tolerate members who ignore my repeated warnings. I'm trying to listen to the Deputy Prime Minister's answer, which I'm finding difficult, and those behind the manager of opposition business are the first to complain when I'm asked to rule on a point of order and I haven't heard everything. I am going to labour the point. It prevents me doing my job, and it's disruptive to the House. And if you think it makes any political difference, you're wrong. You're all wearing masks. It's just a loud wall of noise. The Deputy Prime Minister has the call.
Well, thank you, Mr Speaker. And of course we are making sure that we continue this program, obviously, and we hope that the Australian people find it prudent for the re-election of a coalition government, and we are striving our very best to make sure that they see us in that light. And we look forward to the Labor Party putting forward their views on what they intend to do with the Building Better Regions Fund, And it's interesting that you bring that up, the member for Eden-Monaro. Interesting because I was noting this, that back in was it 2014 in the electorate of, don't want to hear this.
The Deputy Prime Minister will resume his seat. I think the Manager of Opposition Business can resume his seat. So, excuse me, sorry, at this point. I can anticipate where the Deputy Prime Minister is going, which is back 7 years. The question was very specific. It asked whether the Deputy Prime Minister could confirm one grant had been received and another one hadn't. Within that context, he's been very relevant up until this point, but he doesn't have the ability to go down a track of looking at other grants. Deputy Prime Minister has the call.
Well, of course, Mr Speaker, I can confirm that one grant has been received and another one hasn't. That's the answer you want.
The member for Flynn.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Deputy Prime Minister. Will the Deputy Prime Minister outline to the House how the Morrison-Joyce government's plans for a strong economic recovery is delivering infrastructure projects and creating jobs in regional Australia, and particularly in my home state of Queensland? And I'd like to thank the BBRF for that project to the township.
No, the member will just ask his question, okay? You've missed 90-second statements, okay? The Deputy Prime Minister has the call.
Oh, Mr Speaker, you're too cruel. And, but Mr Speaker, I would have to acknowledge that the member for Flynn is retiring, and he has had a marvellous career here, over a decade. And Mr Speaker, it's a marvellous career after being a great success in business. And one of the most understated people in this building is the member for Flynn. He has written more cheques and done more business than many other people here combined. And that's the sort of acumen we want. That is the sort of acumen we want. Whether it's fuel businesses, hotel businesses. I know he's got a great love of the racehorse business and still has. But, Mr Speaker, he has stood behind his people. He stood behind the 845 people of Bigoton, as he just mentioned, with the $5.7 million they got for the Bigoton water treatment plant. Mr Speaker, if the people of Bigoton had to pay for it per person, man, woman and child, that's over $6,700 each. $6,700 each they would have to find. And of course they can't find that money, and that's why we have a coalition government, Nationals and Liberals, to make sure the people of Bigoton are looked after. Or it's not just there, Mr Speaker. It could be the Ivy Anderson village at Springshaw. Mr Speaker, as you know, people want to be born in an area, live in an area, work in an area, and spend the last of their days or the rest of their days in that area. And in Bigoton and in Springshaw, with 1,100 people, it was $4 million that the Nationals, the Liberals, the coalition government provided so that people could have, those 9 extra units. I know it's hilarious. For us, we find this serious. We find aged care serious. But and we make sure that we provide for that in a myriad of forms. And in Gladstone, that great industrial city, with everything from coal, from beef, from grain, from sodium cyanide, from all the things, in excess of 45,000 people in that marvellous industrial city that the member for Flynn has stood beside. And he's going to make sure after his decade in the air that that city continues to grow for the decades into the future. Mr Speaker, it's not just in the member for Flynn's seat, but also as we go north to Hells Gate. Hells Gate, the member for Kennedy's seat, who's not here today. The member for Kennedy, I was speaking to the member for Kennedy today, or more to the point, he was speaking to me, and we once more went over Hell's Gate and how important that is for the development of our nation, for the damn Hell's Gate, as rightly pointed out to me by the Prime Minister, that the business case will arrive back here early next year, and this will be instrumental in not only in the wealth of those downstream, but in moving water west. That is vision. That's what you get from the coalition. That's why the Australian people will be re-electing us.
The Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Deputy Prime Minister in his capacity as the Minister representing the Minister for Regionalisation. In the Senate just now, the Minister for Regionalisation has said that if the Prime Minister adopts net zero without the approval of the National Party, quote, it will be ugly. Does the Minister agree?
The Deputy Prime Minister has the call.
Mr Speaker, what I can say is that the process of going through this has been diligently followed. The process, and I have been in close contact with the Prime Minister through this process. And what I can say, Mr Speaker, in that a committee of four, which is Minister McKenzie, Minister Pitt, Minister Littleproud and Minister Hogan, have all been working on this process, and as recently as today I've had a meeting because we're going to make sure that the Prime Minister of Australia is reported back to as soon as possible. In fact, I believe in the next day, within the next day, that we will get back to him, because we are not grandstanding. This is not.
Members on my left.
Well, what I do, I'll take the interjection.
No, don't take the interjection. I'm about to deal with the interjections.
There's about 400 of them, but what I'd like to know, Mr Speaker, is I hear so often how the Labor Party have been wanting this for 8 years, I think, but we haven't received one dot of a costing, one dot of a proposed plan, not one dot of it. So even though they have not provided us a skerrick of evidence as to how they would achieve their outcome after 8 years. And by gosh, Mr Speaker, they've had a lot of spare time in that 8 years.
Just say to the Deputy Prime Minister, the member for Isaacs, I can still hear you, notwithstanding the fact you've moved. The Deputy Prime Minister just needs to come back to the question. I realise the provocation, but he just needs to come back to the question. I allowed some tolerance.
Sorry, Mr Speaker, interjecting.
Yes.
Mr Speaker, we will make sure that we follow a prudent process. I acknowledge the work for the Senator of Victoria, but I state that it will be a prudent process for which our party can stand behind, and we will work constructively to make sure that that is not only the best outcome for regional people, that we respect the role of the Nationals Party room, that the final arbiter will be the Nationals Party room of our position. We know.
Members on my left.
We know your position. We know
the members for Isaacs and Whitlam can leave understanding.
That's correct, Order 94A. I am the Deputy Prime Minister, and you are the Leader of the Opposition, and long may that be the case.
The member for Warringah.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. To the Prime Minister, a number of climate-denying national members of your government have been holding climate policy to ransom, so other members can reflect their community's call to rapidly act on climate change. Will you allow an open debate and conscience vote on the climate change bill before Parliament, or are the Nationals' votes the most powerful within the coalition?
Just before I call the Prime Minister, the first part of the question had some descriptions in it that really don't belong in a question, I need to say, assertions like that. And I think all members, including the member for Warringah, wouldn't like if there was a question that made an assertion about them. So I'm just going to point that out, that is not really what question time's for. There are other forms of the House where people can engage in political combat of that nature. The Prime Minister has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The world's response to climate change, and that will be the subject of the summit that is being held in Glasgow in a few weeks' time, will be seeking to bring people together on this issue. And, Mr Speaker, the response that is being made around the world to climate change will have a significant impact on Australia. It will have a significant impact, particularly on rural and regional Australia, and it would be, I think, unfair for this place to send anything other than a message to those Australians that we understand that we understand that people in rural and regional Australia will face some real challenges to their economic futures because of what is happening around the world and the changes in the global economy. Now, the Liberals and the Nationals understand that, and we think it's important that we don't engage, I think, Mr Speaker, with those who have a different view to us or even different views in a discussion in any sort of pejorative way. I don't think that's very helpful, Mr Speaker, in what we're trying to achieve here, because I think Australians, Mr Speaker, want to embrace the changes that are occurring, but I also think they want to ensure that all Australians can go ahead together, Mr Speaker, in rural and regional areas, and that we have a clear and considered plan for how that is going to be achieved, so we can both mitigate the negative impacts of what is going to occur and realise the opportunities that can be there for all Australians, but particularly in rural and regional areas. Now, Mr Speaker, that is what the government is working through, and the government will make a decision about the position that will be taken to COP26, Mr Speaker. The date hasn't changed. It's been the same date all year, Mr Speaker. We've been working towards that date over the course of the year, so when I attend that summit, I will take the government's position. And the government's position, Mr Speaker, will be determined, like all government positions are, and that is by the federal cabinet. Because, Mr Speaker, that was the approach taken in the past when it came to these matters, and on the commitments that Australia has made in the past on these issues. On Kyoto 1, we meet and we beat. On Kyoto 2, we met and we beat it, Mr Speaker. And on Paris, we will meet and beat the commitments that we have made. Now, Mr Speaker, there is no mystery at all on this side of the House as to what our 2030 target is. It's what we took to the last election. It was endorsed by the Australian people, Mr Speaker, and we have been implementing those policies, and we have seen a 20% and more reduction in carbon emissions since 2005. We have one of the highest rates, if not the highest rates, of rooftop solar in the world. We are seeing record levels of investment in renewable technologies here in Australia, and we propose there to be more. Now, Mr Speaker, those opposite have not set out their 2030 target. They have repealed, they say, the target they took to the last election.
Concluded. The member for Chisholm.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Treasurer. Will the Treasurer inform the House how the Morrison government's strong economic management and sticking to our national plan in ensuring our economy is set up to generate more jobs for Australian families and businesses? Is the Treasurer aware of any alternative policies?
The Treasurer.
Well, thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for Chisholm for a question. Acknowledge her background in small business, Mr Speaker, in small business as a speech pathologist and as a strong advocate for the people of Burwood, Box Hill and Blackburn across her electorate. Now, Mr Speaker, today the Australian economy got some further positive economic data. Job ads were up 4.9% for the month, Mr Speaker, with the strongest growth in New South Wales, job ads up 16%, Mr Speaker. We have seen data from the National Skills Commission which demonstrates that businesses are rehiring as their doors are reopening, Mr Speaker. Businesses are rehiring as their doors are reopening. And we know that the Australian economy will rebound strongly as a result of the economic support that we have put in place and as a result of the restrictions easing across the country. And I welcome the fact that tomorrow in the great state of Victoria we will see those restrictions eased. Now, yesterday, consumer confidence was up for the 6th week in a row. Last week, business confidence was up. Last week, we saw Australia's AAA credit rating reaffirmed and our economic outlook upgraded. And we know that $330 billion has been accumulated on household and business balance sheets that primes the Australian economy for a strong recovery. Now I'm asked, are there any alternative policies, Mr Speaker? Well, we've seen from those opposite the carbon tax, which saw electricity prices skyrocket. We saw from those opposite the mining tax, which didn't raise any revenue. We saw the cash for clunkers and we saw the pink bats. But 77 days ago, we got another policy that probably makes Labor's greatest hits, Mr Speaker. That was a $6 billion conversation starter, a cash splash to pay $300 to people who've already had the jab, Mr Speaker. Now, the member for Rankin, in a cameo appearance before this chamber, Mr Speaker, he had this view. He said that the government should pick up and run with the idea, Mr Speaker. But it's not a memo that the shadow cabinet got, Mr Speaker, because they're not running with the idea, they're running away from the idea, Mr Speaker. Because on Insiders, Senator Katie Gallagher, the shadow finance minister, was asked directly about the $300 payment to people who already had the jab. What did she say? Is it still their policy? The time has passed for that.
The Leader of the Opposition.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Regional Development. The Business Council of Australia's recent modelling shows that, in dollar terms, regional Australians will be 3 times better off from a transition to net zero by 2050 than people in cities. Does the Minister agree with that modelling? What does the government's own modelling show?
The Deputy Prime Minister has the call.
Mr Speaker, one part of that question's very simple. I don't agree with the Business Council of Australia's modelling, so you want a straight answer, there it is. Nor should I have to, because that's the Business Council of Australia's modelling. And so they're entitled to their modelling. And modelling is not a letter from God. It is no more than the opinion of people. Maybe the member for Grainer is an expert in non-linear regression analysis. I'm certainly not, so I'm not going to say, well, you certainly are not. At least I did econometrics, you didn't. So the issue, of course, Mr. Speaker, is I doubt whether the skill sets for analysis of things such as regression analysis reside in many corners of this chamber at all. Maybe it does. Maybe I'm confounded in my ignorance about who is expert in that. So when we talk about modelling and when we talk about have I been aware of modelling, I'd have to say, Mr. Speaker, the people with the capacity to do a deep dive into modelling, to get to the very bottom of it, would be a very, very small group indeed. A very, very small group indeed. What I am interested, though, in, Mr. Speaker, is the results of modelling, and for that, the member for Hume, the minister, has shown us sections of that, and we are aware of that. And Mr. Speaker,
members on my left,
and on the premise of that, we have used the time. 1 week to deal with something that will go for decades into the future, to do our very best to make sure that we are able to correspond with our people and our electorates, our best analysis, so that we can give them the best deliberations on an incredibly important decision. Now, the Liberal Party, Mr. Speaker, have had, obviously, the Prime Minister, as leader of the Liberal Party, has had the capacity for their analysis of this. But the Labor Party, Mr. Speaker, has told us that in the last 8 years they've been calling for something, and in 8 years, Mr. Speaker, they have not come up with a plan. They have not come up with a plan. We don't know what they've been doing. They have not given us any costing. What they have said is there's something they will buy. They don't quite know what it costs, and they don't quite know what it is, but they're going to buy it. No, I'm finished.
Okay. The member for Robertson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Health and Aged Care. Will the Minister please update the House on the key milestones in the vaccine rollout and how these are continuing to keep Australian lives and livelihoods safe?
The Minister for Health and Aged Care.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank the member for Robertson and note to the House that Australians have now passed the 70% double-dose vaccination rate. To be precise, 70.9%. 007. Our first dose rate as a nation is 85.5%. And in Robertson, it's over 80% for double dose and an extraordinary 95% for those that have already had their first dose. Around the nation, Australians have stepped forward and are stepping forward to protect themselves and their families, their friends, their communities and their country. And we thank them and we honour them. And they are doing that in record numbers. What we've seen is 277,000 come forward in the last 24 hours. We've now passed the 33 million mark for Australians that have been vaccinated. We've passed the million mark for those who are between 12 and 15 that have had either first or second doses, 60% and 25% respectively for first and second doses for those young Australians who are doing their bit to protect the country. And then when we look around the states and territories, here in the ACT an extraordinary 98.1%, New South Wales over 92%, Victoria is on the cusp of joining that 90% club at just over 89%, Tasmania is on its way to 90%, and all other 4 jurisdictions, South Australia, the NT, Queensland and WA, are in the 70% to 80% bracket. And those numbers are increasing every day. All of this means that in a world that is seeing over 400,000 cases a day, 7,500 lives lost, 7,500 lives lost in the last 24 hours, Australians are protecting themselves and they are protecting others. And we couldn't have done this without the extraordinary work of our nurses and our doctors, our pathologists, whether it's public or private, everybody who has been assisting in the process of this vaccine rollout. It is about saving lives and it's about protecting lives. And we see this in terms of the results with regards to hospitalisation, serious illness and loss of life, that the vaccines are protecting people, and we are doing this as we said we would do, but we are doing it with record numbers. And I want to thank every Australian that has come forward, but to continue to urge those that have yet to have a first dose, those that are due to have their second dose, to come forward and be vaccinated.
Member for Bendigo.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Regional Development. Does the minister agree with the National Farmers Federation President Fiona Simpson, who says the lack of a net zero target will punish farmers?
Deputy Prime Minister has the call.
Mr Speaker, I thank the honourable member for a question. And I'd say I've got great respect for the National Farmers Federation, great respect. But I'm not here as a member of the National Farmers Federation. I'm here as a member of the Nationals Party, and to make sure that those people in regional Australia who we represent are treated with respect and are given the best, our best endeavours on an incredibly important decision, that they know that we have been dutiful in our task. Now, Mr Speaker, I also say, and this is really important, that every time someone mentions the Nationals Party, a great kernel within our party is farmers. But even in my own electorate, Mr Speaker, only 12% of my electorate are farmers. 12% of my electorate are farmers, of which I am one. And of course, Mr Speaker, what we have done for those people and those electorates is the reason overwhelmingly those seats are held by Nationals and Liberal Party members, because what they have heard from the Labor Party in regards to their future has been pretty dire. If we go back through the record of the Labor Party, whether it's the carbon tax or the closure of the live cattle trade, it is not a good record at all. It is not a good record at all. But, Mr Speaker, we are also making sure, and this is fundamentally important, that in our deliberations we understand people in the working class areas of Gladstone, in the working class areas of Townsville, in the areas of South Tamworth. We are very mindful of the people of Singleton and of Muswellbrook, that those people who live in the streets, who may not be farmers, but are just as important, will know that the Nationals are in there fighting for them.
The member for Forde.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Home Affairs. Will the Minister please update the House on how the Morrison government's national plan facilitates a safe opening of Australia's international borders and ensures that Australians and permanent residents currently waiting overseas can return home?
The Minister for Home Affairs.
Thank you, and I thank the member for his question, and I congratulate the people in his electorate of Forde who have rolled up their sleeves and have helped Australia to reach the significant milestone of a 70% vaccination rate right across the country. So we are officially in Phase B of the national plan. Now, as we continue to hit those vaccination milestones, we will reopen our international borders, and we will do that in line with the national plan. We want to make sure that families, friends, loved ones can be reunited as soon as possible. We want to bring into this country the international students that have long enjoyed learning and studying here in Australia. We want to make sure that we can bring in the skilled workers that Australian industry so desperately needs. And we want to make sure that as soon as we possibly safely can do so, we will be bringing back international tourists here so that they can enjoy everything that we have to offer here in this country. Now, we've made it very clear that the first step in reopening our borders is lifting the travel restrictions for fully vaccinated Australian citizens, permanent residents and their families, including parents, both here and overseas. And with many states and territories moving to home quarantine or to no quarantine for fully vaccinated travellers, international travel will be far easier. It will also mean that fully vaccinated Australians wanting to return from overseas can come home quicker. Now, we know that vaccination is the key to being able to safely reopen to the world, which is why we have been planning for a time when we'd reach vaccinations of 80%, which is Phase C of the national plan. And we are on track to achieve that nationally early next month. And as someone who represents an electorate on a state border, I have to say that I am looking forward to the day when state borders become a sign on the side of a road and not a roadblock, not something that stops people from being able to enter and to come home. So from a Commonwealth perspective, we will manage a sensible, staged reopening of our international borders. The Australian Border Force stands ready to make sure that they are in a position, as they are, to support the reopening of our international airports, and they will be working very closely with airlines to support passengers as they enter and they leave Australia. So the Australian people have done the right thing. They've done that by achieving that very significant milestone of 70% vaccination rates today. And they can be assured, absolutely assured, that the Morrison government is committed to restoring our normal way of life and the freedoms that generations of Australians have enjoyed for years.
The Leader of the Opposition.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Transport. Does the Minister agree with the Prime Minister that electric vehicles will end the weekend?
The Deputy Prime Minister has the call.
Well, Mr Speaker, I don't know whether that is a complete quote. I think whether it was taken in context, I have a suspicion, Mr Speaker, that it's not actually taken in context, and I think that it might have been a reflection of another party's policies and not our own. I don't think that was a reflection of our policies. And Mr Speaker, it's quite clear that we understand the dynamics of this nation. We note also, Mr Speaker, as he refers to electric cars, that Boris Johnson has a policy on electric cars at the moment. I'm sure that in some areas they're very pertinent, but of course in other areas they're not. But what it does say, Mr Speaker, that we might... Do you want to...
The Deputy Prime Minister will resume his seat. The Leader of the Opposition on a point of order.
A point of order, and it goes to relevance and the Minister's answer. where he said he wasn't sure about the quote. I'm happy
No,
to provide the quote.
I've heard the question. It was a short question, and I'm ready to rule on the point of order. As I've repeatedly said as Speaker, I can't vouch for the accuracy of questions or indeed answers. No, I don't, and I certainly don't want to start receiving evidence during question time. I'm just pointing out that's the nature of question time. It's not my role to vouch for the accuracy or not. I just simply make the point, when a question is framed, even in a tight way like that, that has as its heart an accusation, the questioner well knows, particularly an experienced one, that it might be seeking a yes or no answer, but that cannot be compelled, and the Minister answering the question merely needs to be relevant to it, and I'm listening to him. The Deputy Prime Minister.
Well, thank you, mate, very, very much, Mr. Speaker. And I note that I believe that the context of that question was on the premise of a policy brought forward by the then Leader of the Labor Party, the member for Maribyrnong. Now, what I can say for the member for Maribyrnong, he seems to have a more substantial policy direction in regards to any target than the member for Grayndler, who in his time in the seat has not presented any policy of how he would achieve the objectives of what he wants. So what we have in this place is quite clear. We have a policy that has been developed and planned diligently, I imagine, over an incredibly long period of time, by the Leader of the Liberal Party, the Prime Minister of the Commonwealth of Australia. We have a process of analysis that has now been conducted by myself and the Nationals, and we have a complete and utter void on the other side.
The member for Parkes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Regional Health. Will the Minister update the House on the success of the rollout of the Morrison-Joyce government's vaccination program in rural, regional and remote areas?
The Minister for Regional Health.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to thank the honourable member for Parkes for his question, and I would like to compliment him on the tireless work that he has done for his electorate of Parkes, which is as big as the country called Germany.
Members on my left.
I'd also like to compliment him on the great work he did when he was in the health portfolio, with his work on the single employer model for GP registrars and the innovative models of care, which are really kicking goals in the workplace dilemma in the health portfolio. He's also lived through the cyclone of Delta arriving in his own electorate, and he and his contacts and liaising with the Flying Doctor Service, the New South Wales local health districts, with the GPs and the pharmacies has meant that Western New South Wales has got through it. Regional Australia was at the forefront of planning back in 2020. There was a special plan put in place for vaccine delivery amongst Indigenous back in March, before this Delta wave hit. And that model is being used around the country now in places like Northern Victoria, around the fine city of Mildura that the member for Mallee looks after. And that model is working. There was a full court press of expanded vaccines powered into the area at short notice. There were extra GPs brought on board, extra pharmacies rolled out, Commonwealth vaccination clinics, Defence Vaccine Administration teams, AUSMAT teams, and of course that net result is that now there are no more active cases in Wilcannia that everyone is aware of. The New South Wales Department of Health turned up with 30 motorhomes to supply isolation accommodation for those cases, so it was really a full court press. And we have seen that around other places. Regional Australia, there has been a lag in Indigenous rates, but because of the ACHOs engaging with their own local leadership teams and counteracting all the misinformation on social media, they are catching up. When I visited Tobwabba, my own Aboriginal Medical Service, their vaccination rate is 62% double vax, which is a great achievement.
Member for
So
Macarthur.
regional Australia has been at the forefront of planning and implementation and delivery, and whether you're in the most far-flung regions of Australia, Commonwealth plans, either the Flying Doctor or all those primary care people doing a wonderful job, will look after you and keep you safe.
The member for McMahon.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Regional Development. The Minister opposes the New South Wales Government New England Renewable Energy Zone, saying it will turn the region into a sea of wind farms. That zone will create thousands of jobs, cheaper electricity and $11 billion of investment in his own electorate. Why does the Minister for Regional Development oppose regional jobs?
The Deputy Prime Minister has the call.
Well, Mr Speaker, I thank the honourable member for his question, and I must say we are looking forward, if that is the case, to wind farms in Sydney. I suppose if all these jobs are to be created, then there is absolutely no reason we can't put them off the coast of Manly. There's no reason at all. If it creates all these thousands of jobs, you would have no problems with that. So I acknowledge that the Shadow Minister has clearly stated that he has got no problems with wind farms off the coast of Manly. He has no problems with wind farms off the coast of Manly, and you probably might hear about that in the paper, and it looks like we have other members who have got no problems on the Labor Party with wind farms off the coast of Manly. But, Mr Speaker, this is a vexed issue. It is a vexed issue because I actually disagree with him fervently that wind farms create thousands of jobs in New England. They don't. They don't, right? They can produce power, there's no doubt about that, but they don't produce thousands of jobs. And what we have, and you're probably removed from regional areas, so you're not aware of this at the moment, that we now have a very vexed issue with the divide between those who are for wind farms and against wind farms in the areas where there are wind farms. And if you actually had any knowledge of regional areas, you'd be aware of that. Or you disagree with that, Member for Edmund area? I don't think so. This is the area where we can divide communities right down the middle. Right down the middle. And in so doing, we are making sure in the New England and other areas, that just as we are on other policies, that we listen to the people and not come up with glib one-liners that completely misunderstand the issues. So the member for McMahon has clearly stated today that he wants wind farms off the coast of Manly, and may he stand by that statement.
I think the Deputy Prime Minister's concluded his answer, so we'll go to the next question. On a point of order, the Leader of the Opposition on a point of order.
It goes to disorderly conduct. It's not within the realm of the Deputy Prime Minister to verbal members on this side during his speech. He just
the Leader of the Opposition
to do
can resume his seat. No, the Leader of the Opposition can resume his seat, and I did anticipate that this would occur at some time during the sitting. I've made the point repeatedly that certainly ministers can't ask questions, because those non-ministers, it's not how question time works. I won't go through it all, it's fairly obvious. But I do think the Leader of the Opposition has a reasonable point, which is that the Hansard record shows what's said, and when it comes to so-called verbling, I see this in questions as well. And I am going to make that point. Whoever's expressing surprise, he must have been one of the ones that hasn't been here for a long time. So questions that have as their heart an accusation, like one just recently asked by the Leader of the Opposition, do fall into that category as well. And I don't think members want me intervening on absolutely every aspect where someone feels misrepresented. That's why they can claim to be misrepresented at the end of question time. The member for Bennelong.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Education and Youth. With many students in my electorate returning to school this week, will the Minister outline how the Morrison government is ensuring the national curriculum will help our kids roar back and instil a factual, positive view of our history and love of our country.
The Minister for Education and Youth.
Well, I'm going to thank the member for Bennelong for his question and his contribution to his electorate and indeed to our nation. Mr Speaker, it is fantastic that kids are returning to school in Melbourne and Sydney, and it is such a relief to parents and for kids. And as they do return to school, we are absolutely backing them in to roar back. We're doing that through record funding to every single school. We're doing that through additional mental health supports. We're doing that through keeping the economy strong so that there's opportunities for them post-schooling. And of course, Mr Speaker, we're also doing this through revising the national curriculum to ensure that standards are high and that we instil that love of country which the member for Bennelong referred to. Mr Speaker, as you'd be aware, that national curriculum is presently under review, but I've got to say that I would not support what the Independent Australian Curriculum Authority has presently put out. And the reason being, Mr Speaker, is because in some cases standards haven't been lifted but have in fact gone backwards. And the clearest example of that is in the teaching of the times tables, where presently kids would be taught that in Year 3, but under the revised national curriculum, which ACARA has put out, the independent body, it would be taught in Year 4. In some other countries, it's actually taught in Year 2. But I can tell you what is suggested to be taught in Year 2, and that is to suggest or to analyse whether a statue is racist. So you can't learn the times tables, but you can do an analysis of a statue in Year 2 when you are 7. My biggest problem, though, Mr Speaker, is actually in the history curriculum.
Members on
and
my
it's in
left.
this history curriculum, Mr Speaker, where I have the greatest problem. Mr Speaker, as you know, we live in the greatest egalitarian, freest, wealthiest countries that has almost ever existed in the history of humankind. But if you read that national draft curriculum on the history, you wouldn't think this. It has such a miserable view of our history, Mr Speaker. And frankly, we're not going to stand for that, because there is a reason that we are the greatest country in the world, and kids need to learn about that reason so that they can defend it, so they can be proud of it, and they can do what previous generations have done. And Mr Speaker, I notice whenever I talk about this topic, whenever I talk about pride in Australia, I talk about pride in our history, the Labor Party opposite gets so upset because they have equally such a miserable view of our history, and they want that miserable view imparted onto kids. Well, we don't on this side of the House. We are proud of our country. We know that mums and dads are proud of their country, and we want to ensure that kids are equally proud.
The member for Brand.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Regional Development. BHP and Rio Tinto have committed to net zero emissions by 2050 for their companies. Given the mining, farming and livestock industries all support net zero, why won't the Minister?
The Deputy Prime Minister has the call.
Well, Mr Speaker, first of all, I don't agree with the premise of the question that all farming industries support zero emission. There was certainly mention there, and all mining industries support zero emission. I acknowledge the statements of BHP and Rio, and the statements of the NFF. I acknowledge the statements made by the NFF. They certainly come with caveats. There's no doubt about that. And I haven't heard BHP and Rio or
Member for McMahon.
Sorry. I'm sorry, I missed that.
No, let's just move on. And interjections I'll deal with. You answer the question and I'll deal with those interjections.
So I did actually hear it. I just wanted to repeat it. So, Mr. Speaker, it's incredibly important that we understand that the CEO of BHP or the CEO of Rio, who I think resides in London, well, one thing I do know is they don't reside in Muswellbrook, and they don't reside in Singleton, and they don't reside in Petra Avenue, South Tamworth, where I once lived. They don't reside in Emerald, and they don't reside in Gladstone. And so these people who had good luck to them and God bless them, had a very fortunate life, will not live with the same outcomes if we don't do this properly as the people in the regional towns that we represent. So to talk about the views of someone who lives in the rarefied air as a senior business person, although we've got no problems with that whatsoever, is not really the people that the Nationals represent. We represent the blue-collar working men and women of the town of Gladstone who have been deserted by the Labor Party. And we represent the miners of Mara who have been deserted by the Labor Party. And might I quote also the member for Hunter, who I think realises this as well, who says that the Labor Party has done nothing in regards to greenhouse gas reduction emissions in the last 14 years. So if there's one person that I think warrants listening to on this one, is the member for Hunter, and he lives, unsurprisingly, in a mining seat. So we won't listen to people in the boardrooms or be bullied by people in the boardrooms. We will listen to the people who are actually our constituency.
The member for Mallee.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Agriculture and Northern Australia. Will the Minister update the House on how the Morrison-Joyce government has supported regional Australia through the COVID-19 pandemic, including through the government's support for the nation's iconic agricultural shows and field days?
The Minister for Agriculture.
Well, thank you, Mr Speaker, and can I thank the member for Mallee for her question and her commitment and support of our strong agricultural shows and field days in her own electorate of Mallee. Our agricultural shows play an important role, not just bringing our communities together once a year, but also in showcasing what's so great about our agricultural industries. And sadly, COVID has struck them a cruel blow. The 50,000 volunteers across this country that turn up to support their community, to showcase their community every year, and the over 4,000 showmen and women who travel across this country in making sure that there are rides there for the kids as well to make the shows even better. And COVID has dealt them a cruel blow, not only this year but last year. Last year we committed $34.5 million to help support them get through these tough times, and an additional $25 million this year to help pay for many of those fixed costs that will not go away, like their insurance, like their rates, like their electricity. And they have no income stream to be able to support that. So for those cancelled shows and field days, we've stepped in and we've supported them to keep them going, to support those men and women that are prepared to volunteer for their community. And in the member for Mallee's own electorate, there's over $200,000 that has gone into that. And part of that, there's been over $38 million of that has gone to our raw shows. Last year, all our raw shows in our capital cities were shut down. This year, Brisbane, Adelaide, Melbourne, Canberra, and we're hoping Hobart will be able to showcase, were unable to run. And they play an important role in connecting the city and the bush, bringing the bush to the city and being able to showcase to those metropolitan Australians how we produce their food and fibre in the sustainable way that we do, so they can take pride and understanding of what Australian farmers do. So this is an investment not only in the city but also in the bush, in making sure there's an appreciation of the hard work that our men and women do in the agricultural sector. And we're continuing to make sure that we also support those showmen and women. And I've got to acknowledge the member for Maribyrnong for his advocacy on this and bringing it to my attention, that they were the forgotten ones. And we've worked together to make sure that there's been over $8 million to support them, to take money and to provide money to the show societies to pay for their rents. So the show societies get the money, but the financial burden of these showmen and women is taken away. These are small businessmen and women right across our country that travel across our country and bring so much joy. And it was important that they were not forgotten, and I'm proud to say that we have not forgotten them. And we've also made sure with our show societies, particularly the country ones, we've supported them with a $20 million infrastructure fund to ensure that they can continue to build the infrastructure. When they've lost their revenue, they don't have the savings to be able to put towards new infrastructure. So $20 million has gone right across this country to help them build the infrastructure, have better shows next year. So our investment is about the men and women that put their heart and soul into our communities and making sure that the show goes on.
The member for McMahon.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Regional Development. Can the Minister confirm the Morrison-Joyce government rejected the Kaban wind and battery project that would provide dispatchable power to 96,000 homes and create 250 regional jobs in the Atherton Tablelands? Why did the government oppose regional jobs?
The Deputy Prime Minister has the call.
You can refer. No, you can.
Well, Mr.
Members
Speaker,
on my left, the Deputy Prime Minister has the call.
Mr Speaker, we know where the regional jobs lie. I can tell you, Mr Speaker, you know what's special, Mr Speaker, about Muswellbrook? It's a mining town. Singleton's a mining town. But I don't know of one town in Australia which you would say that is a renewable energy town. And that's the actual
Members on my
ground truthing
left.
of it. The ground truthing of it.
The Deputy Prime Minister can resume his seat. The member for McMahon on a point of order.
Point of order on direct relevance, Mr Speaker. Muswellbrook is not in the Atherton Tablelands. The jobs are in the Atherton Tablelands.
The member for McMahon will resume his seat. The Deputy Prime Minister is 29 seconds into the answer. He's entitled some context, and I'm listening closely to the Deputy Prime Minister.
Well, Mr Speaker, I'm very aware of Atherton, Tolga, Mareeba. I've spent a lot of time up there. I would suggest a lot more time than the member for McMahon. But if the member for McMahon is so sure of the belief of the renewable jobs as he states, then I can understand why he stands by why he'd want a renewable wind farm off the coast of Manly. I understand why he'd do that.
No, I just say that the Deputy Prime Minister needs to come to the question.
As he nodded in his previous answer when I asked him whether he'd want that.
No, the Deputy Prime Minister needs to deal with the question that's been asked, not the previous
Mr.
question.
Mr. Speaker, we will make sure that we talk about and are very protective of the jobs that we in regional Australia have now. We are not going to go to the people of regional Australia and tell them that for the sake of the zeitgeist of the Labor Party that we will put them out of a job, because we are making sure we protect the jobs now. And if the Labor Party and the leader of the Labor Party and the member for Grainler wants to stand by those mining jobs, wants to stand by coal mining, let him come to the dispatch box right now and say so.
The member for Lindsay.
Thank you, Mr.
The
Speaker.
member for Lindsay will resume her seat. The Leader of the Opposition on a point of order.
It again goes to, I refer to your previous ruling, but if the Deputy Prime Minister continues to make assertions and invite the opposition to take action, when we don't, for people reading it, they will assume that that provides an answer in itself, the fact that we can't answer. And I'd ask you to consider, not necessarily that, but consider the ruling and report back at another time about this process, because it will disrupt the parliament.
Yeah, no, I won't report back. I can report now. I do say to ministers that they can't invite a member to do something that they're not able to do under the standing orders. They simply can't do that in question time or in any other part of the day. So what I'm seeking to do is to avoid that happening. It has happened from time to time since question time was invented, but it's better if it doesn't happen. And also, I should say that the tone of questions are also reflective of that sentiment. Okay, the member for Lindsay.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Immigration, Citizenship, Migrant Services and Multicultural Affairs. Will the minister outline to the House how the Morrison government is keeping Australians safe by strengthening laws to cancel the visas of foreign nationals who have been convicted of serious offences? Is the minister aware of any threats to this approach?
The Minister for Immigration has the call.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I thank the member for Lindsay for that important question. I want to commend her for her work on community safety and her advocacy for victims of family and domestic violence in the electorate of Lindsay. She's a great advocate for them. For the Morrison government, community safety is our highest priority, Mr Speaker, and you can see that in all the actions that the government has taken since we've been elected, from securing our borders, investing in national security, from building and rebuilding our defence forces. Security, community safety is the top priority of a coalition government when we come to office. That's why under this government we are now almost at the cancellation of 10,000 non-citizens whose visas have been cancelled or refused under the character test. For the House, Mr Speaker, these are 10,000 serious criminals who've committed very serious crimes on Australians who have either been deported, had their visas cancelled, or who have been prevented from ever coming here. For the purpose of this House, I just want to record that includes 216 murderers, 1,700 serious drug offenders, over 1,300 sex offenders, 320 outlaw motorcycle gang members, 37 kidnappers, thousands of other violent offenders. And for those thinking this is obvious, Mr Speaker, this is the first Australian government to take this question so seriously, to get the laws to be able to do this and to cancel these visas. And what we've done, Mr Speaker, in the last 3 years is ask the parliament for more laws to be able to take community safety even more seriously. And in doing so, we've been prevented by the Australian Labor Party in getting those powers to ensure that the Australian community can be even safer. And the question has to be asked, Mr Speaker, why does the Australian Labor Party oppose the government getting more power to deport foreign criminals and prevent criminals from ever coming here, Mr Speaker? These are straightforward laws, I say to this House, that have been proposed for many years. They say that if you are a serious criminal or offender that has been convicted for 2 years of a sexual-based offence, of a serious crime, then we can refuse your right to ever come here, Mr Speaker. A simple matter. These are laws that say if you commit a serious offence here, you will be deported from Australia, Mr Speaker. And Labor has again today voted these laws down. Why, Mr Speaker? We know that there are only one group of people in Australia who are happy about this today, and that is the Australian Greens. So I say to the Leader of the Opposition, I say to the Labor Party, why do you oppose these laws? Support the coalition. This bill will come back here and we want you to support these laws.
The member for Sydney.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister for Regional Development, and I refer to the answers he gave yesterday on government modelling. Senator Canavan is demanding the release of government modelling that forecasts the impact of net zero emissions on agriculture. Given the Deputy Prime Minister has admitted that he has the modelling which shows regional impacts, will he release it?
The Deputy Prime Minister has the call.
Well, Mr Speaker, I thank the honourable member for a question, and I might say to the member for Sydney, I said quite clearly I'd seen the results.
Members on my left.
And I can't
Members
help
on
it,
my left.
Mr Speaker, I can't help it, Mr Speaker, if the member for Sydney and the tactics of the Labor Party can't read the Hansard, but if they want to go back and read the Hansard, they would clearly... Well, I think... No, the Hansard is out there, member for Greenlaw. The Hansard is most definitely out there, and you're out there with it. And so if you had read the Hansard, which is out there, you would note that I said the results of the modelling.
Yes.
Now, Mr Speaker, I also said earlier on that I don't pretend for 1 second to be an expert in non-linear regression analysis or linear regression analysis, all the statistical models that are pertinent to modelling. Now, Senator Canavan, Mr Speaker, is. There is one person who is. So I can understand the interest that he may have because he has the competency and skill set to go over that, and that is a very small subset of the people that reside in that, with that expertise in this parliament.
This is true. The member for O'Connor.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Industry, Energy and Emissions Reduction. Will the Minister outline to the House the importance of a technology-focused approach to reducing emissions and how this approach ensures that we can create jobs and protect industry? Is the minister aware of any alternative approaches?
The Minister for Industry, Energy and Emissions Reduction.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Well, I thank the member for O'Connor for his question. As one of the most experienced farmers in this place, Mr Speaker, he's a representative of a strong agricultural and mining region in the west of Australia, Mr Speaker, and he understands the importance of a technology-led approach to providing affordable, reliable energy and bringing down our emissions, Mr Speaker, and it's developments in technology that will strengthen our regions, reduce our emissions without adding costs and without slashing jobs, Mr Speaker, without slashing jobs. That's our focus. It's technology, not taxes, Mr Speaker, and that's why we expanded ARENA's mandate so it can invest in all priority technologies in our technology investment roadmap. Clean hydrogen, Mr Speaker, clean steel and aluminium, soil carbon, regenerating our soils, Mr Speaker, making them healthier, carbon capture and storage, Mr Speaker. And overnight, just overnight, the UK announced their plan to get to net zero, which includes $1 billion for a carbon capture and storage fund, Mr Speaker, to reduce UK emissions by 20 to 30 million tonnes across a series of different hubs, Mr Speaker. They're very similar to our policy, and like the UK, President Joe Biden has said he will double down on carbon capture and storage. Indeed, the IEA and the IPCC have both regard carbon capture as absolutely essential to achieve the goals of the Paris Agreement, and that's crucial to making sure we have strong traditional industries in a country like ours as we bring down our emissions. Indeed, the only people, Mr Speaker, who are refusing to support CCS and the jobs and industries they support are sitting right there, Mr Speaker, in the Australian Labor Party. Now, to achieve our stretch goals in our roadmap, we need to utilise the expertise of every agency we have, including ARENA, Mr Speaker. But, again, twice this week, we've seen the Labor Party joining forces with the Greens to vote against the technology-led approach to reducing emissions, Mr Speaker. Talk about the tail wagging the dog. The member for Melbourne's tail wags this dog every day, Mr Speaker. Now, 7 times they've voted against ARENA investing in low-emissions technologies, including, Mr Speaker, low-emissions vehicles, electric vehicles. 7 times they've voted against more jobs for Australian workers. 7 times they've gone out of their way to undermine the prosperity of regional Australia, Mr Speaker. Together with the Greens, they seek to weaken our traditional industries of mining, agriculture and manufacturing and undermine our regions.
The member for Kingsford Smith.
Thanks, Speaker. A question for the Minister for Regional Development. Given the potential of renewable energy projects in the regions to create jobs and make electricity cheaper, does the Minister agree with the Prime Minister that a renewable energy target is nuts and a muppet of a proposal?
The Deputy Prime Minister has the call.
Well, Mr Speaker, I must say, and I'd like to thank the member for Kingsford Smith for letting me bat right through the innings. It's obviously been great to have a full day of questions. But, Mr Speaker, I reject the premise of the question on the basis that I have not seen in my electorate, which is a major renewable electorate, the thousands of jobs that he claims that they support. I can assure you, Mr Speaker, that as you go past the major renewable precincts, you certainly see lots of wind towers, but you don't see the so-called thousands of jobs. And that is why we make sure that we support where the jobs are. That is why the job of the Nationals Party is to diligently go over this proposal in such a form as that we can report back to our people that we have done our best endeavours to make sure that we protect their jobs, that over the coming decades we protect their standard of living, we protect their capacity to pay off the house that they have bought for their families, the car, the education, that is the role of the Nationals in regional areas. And, Mr Speaker, I'm happy for the member of Kingsford Smith to come to the New England. It's an open invitation, and we can travel round. And if he can find these thousands of jobs, then I would thank him very much for that, because they are just not there.
The member for Stirling.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Veterans Affairs and Minister for Defence Personnel. Will the Minister please update the House on how the Morrison government is continuing to support the health and well-being of veterans and their families, especially during Veterans Health Week?
The Minister for Veterans Affairs.
Well, I thank the member very much for his question. And of course, this week is Veterans Health Week, and there are more than 720 events planned right around Australia. And those events have already kicked off. And I'm delighted that this year's Veterans Health Week is the biggest yet, with ex-service organisations and community groups coming together to host more than of those 720 events between Saturday and the end of November. So it's more than just a week, Mr Speaker. And this year's Veterans Health Week offers plenty of activities, including group walks and runs, water sports, seminars and workshops, dance classes, and even a scavenger hunt, Mr Speaker. And as part of the event calendar, veteran charity Swiss 8 has also been supported to host barbecues across the nation during Veterans Health Week and in the lead-up to Remembrance Day to help raise awareness of the importance of mental health. And so, Mr Speaker, I would encourage everyone out there, veterans and their families, to get involved in Health Week, Veterans Health Week. And I want to thank all of those ex-service organisations and community groups for showing their support and putting on a raft of fantastic COVID-safe events and activities for veterans and their families to participate in. And among the planned virtual events is the Bravery Trek Challenge 2021, run by the Bravery Trust, which challenges veterans and families to walk, run or cycle 100 kilometres to celebrate 100 years of the Royal Australian Air Force. And a full list of Veterans Health Week events and information about how to register is available on the DVA website. And you can go to dva.gov.au/VHW or call DVA on 1800-VETERAN. That's 1800-838-372, or you can email vhw@dva.gov.au. And, Mr Speaker, the veterans of Australia deserve the very best support and welfare that we can give them.
The member for McEwen.
And I'll take the interjection, Mr Speaker, and that's why...
the member for McEwen can leave under Standing Order 94. The Minister has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I appreciate that. Working for veterans is an important piece of national work, Mr Speaker, whether it's through Veterans Health Week, whether it's supporting our veterans through counselling services, or whether it's speeding up the claims processing system, which is a project I'm very passionate about and working on at the moment. This parliament exists, Mr Speaker, to make life better for the people that we represent. And we are going to make sure that under the watch of this government, life is made better for our veterans and that they get all of the support and the care that they need and they deserve.
The Leader of the Opposition on indulgence.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. I join with the Minister and the government in acknowledging the importance of Veterans Mental Health Week. Particularly the events in Afghanistan recently have had a real impact, I know, not just on veterans from Afghanistan, but those who served us loyally in Vietnam and in other theatres of war. And the mental health of our veterans is something that we owe, a debt of gratitude to all the men and women who've worn our uniform in our name.
The Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, I ask that further questions be placed on the notice paper.